Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications before you press play, because you do not want to miss where this one goes. Now, let's get into it. Kang Si-won had survived 3 assassination attempts before he turned 30. He had sat across from men who wanted him dead and negotiated with them calmly, the way other men discussed weather. He had never, in 20 years of running the Baeko Group, lost control of a single room. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications before you press play, because you do not want to miss where this one goes. Now, let's get into it. Until that Tuesday morning. She didn't even see him. She had no idea that the most dangerous man in Gangnam was standing frozen in his own doorway. Unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do the one thing his entire life had been built around. Staying in control. His chest tightened, his jaw locked. Somewhere underneath 20 years of discipline, something shifted, and he would spend the next 3 weeks trying, and failing, to put it back. He had walked into the wrong room at the wrong time. Or maybe, and this thought would follow him for days, he had walked in at exactly the right one. This is the story of a man who controlled everything, and the woman who, without even trying, became the one thing he couldn't. Seoul runs like a machine. Precise, cold, unforgiving. At the very top of that machine, in a penthouse overlooking the river like a throne above a kingdom, lived Kang Si-won, 37 years old. Unmarried by choice. Feared by design. He had inherited the Baeko Group at 25, after his father died in circumstances nobody investigated out loud. In 12 years he had tripled its reach, absorbed 2 rivals, and built a reputation so absolute that city officials returned his calls personally. To the public, he was a real estate developer, sharp suits, careful press appearances, a face that gave away nothing. Behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. He never raised his voice, he never needed to. Everyone around him understood the same unspoken rule. Disappoint him once, and you would spend the rest of your life waiting to find out what it cost you. That uncertainty was his greatest weapon. His penthouse was immaculate, not from vanity, but because disorder unsettled him in a way he'd never bothered to examine. Everything had a place. Everyone had a function. That was the rule. Amara Chukwu had been in that penthouse for 7 months before he properly registered that she was a person with opinions. She was from Lagos, Nigeria, 26 years old. A hospitality management degree that wasn't opening doors fast enough at home, 2 younger siblings needing school fees, and a mother whose medical bills didn't care about anyone's timeline. So she'd taken a live-in position through an agency that placed staff exclusively with Seoul's wealthiest households. She knew who Kang Si-won was before she ever stepped through his door. The agency briefed every placement. She knew about the rumors, the power, the danger. She decided none of it was her business. Her business was the penthouse, the schedule, the kitchen, the invisible choreography that kept a very particular, very powerful man's world running smoothly. She was exceptional at it, but Amara was not the kind of woman who made herself small to keep other people comfortable. She wasn't loud, she wasn't rude, she simply took up exactly the space she was owed, and not an inch less. The first time Si-won truly noticed this, it was a Thursday evening. He'd come home earlier than expected. She was in the kitchen finishing dinner, singing softly under her breath, something in Igbo, low and unhurried. She didn't stop when she heard him. She glanced over, gave him the same composed nod she always did, and kept cooking. He stood there 3 full seconds, a very long time, for a man like him, to stand anywhere without purpose, before walking to his office and shutting the door. He didn't examine why he'd stood there. He'd trained himself not to examine things that didn't serve the mission. But the melody stayed with him longer than it should have. Over the following weeks, he began noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way she moved through the apartment, unhurried, never slow. The way she'd reorganized his bookshelf, not alphabetically, but by subject and then by color, and somehow it made more sense than his own system ever had. The way she handled his difficult assistant on a bad scheduling day, direct, warm, entirely unbothered. She never tried to disappear the way most people in her position did. And somehow that stillness she carried was louder than anything else in the apartment. He told himself it was irrelevant. He had a land deal closing in 3 weeks that would expand the Baeko Group's legitimate front into 2 new districts. He had a lieutenant in Busan he suspected was skimming. He had a partner meeting that required his full concentration, He did not have time to think about his housekeeper. For a while, he almost believed it. Then came the morning that broke everything open. It was a Tuesday. Siwon had been awake since 4. A call from Busan had confirmed the lieutenant's situation was worse than reported. There was a leak, possibly 2, and he'd need to handle it personally. He'd been on the phone for hours, tense and running on black coffee. He'd assumed Amara's schedule started later that morning. He was wrong. He pushed open the door to the East guest suite, the room he used for sensitive calls, to retrieve a document from the night before, and the world stopped. Amara was there, mid-task, changing linens, music playing quietly from her phone, completely at ease, completely unguarded. Morning light fell across her from the floor-to-ceiling windows, like the room had been built for that exact moment. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The thought arrived fully formed, uninvited, and hit him hard enough that he actually stopped breathing. She turned, saw him, and, because she was Amara, didn't gasp or scramble. She met his eyes directly. "Mr. Kang," she said, calm as ever. "I thought you'd finished in here. I can come back." He said nothing. Not because he was rude, because, and this was the part that would unsettle him for days, he could not locate a single word in any language he spoke. Kang Siwon, who negotiated with armed men without blinking, could not speak. His body had already decided without him, the tightness in his chest, the stillness in his feet, refusing to carry him back out of the doorway, his eyes refusing to leave her face even as every rational part of his mind screamed at him to walk away. She tilted her head slightly, not mocking, just reading him the way she always seemed to read a room, and said quietly, "I'll give you a moment." She lifted her basket and walked past him, close enough that he caught her scent, something warm that had no business being that disarming. Kang Siwon stood alone in an empty room for 4 full minutes, surrounded by the wreckage of 20 years of discipline. He didn't bring it up. Of course he didn't. He was not a man who processed things out loud. He was a man who buried something, built a wall around it, and got very busy, so he'd never have to look at the wall directly. So that's exactly what he did. Flew to Busan the next morning, and handled the lieutenant's situation with a coldness that reminded the room exactly why they feared him. Sharp, focused, fully present. And yet, somewhere behind all the strategy, something sat quietly, waiting. Like an ember that didn't need fanning, just time. He came back to Seoul 4 days later, late, past midnight. The penthouse was quiet. He assumed Amara had long since gone to her room. He was wrong again. She was curled on the living room couch, legs tucked under her, reading, a lamp glowing beside her and a cup of something warm on the table. She looked up, entirely unsurprised. "There's food in the oven," she said. "I kept it warm. Wasn't sure when you'd be back." He stopped walking. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said simply, and went back to her book. He stood there. That was twice now. Twice she had rendered him momentarily useless just by being exactly herself. He went to the kitchen. The food was perfectly kept. Jollof rice from the day before. Grilled chicken, still warm. He ate alone at the island the way he always did, except this time the light from the living room spilled through the doorway and he could hear the occasional soft turn of a page, and the silence felt different, less empty than usual. He hated that he noticed. The next morning, he almost did something that shocked even him. She was in the kitchen when he came for coffee, moving through her routine. He stood at the counter, and before his walls could veto the impulse, he asked, "What were you reading last night?" She glanced at him, a flicker of surprise, quickly folded back into her usual composure. "The Weight of Silence. Have you read it?" "No." "You should," she said. No hesitation, no softening, as if she were speaking to anyone, as if he were anyone. He looked at her a moment. "Is it good?" "It's honest," she said, which is rarer than good. He took his coffee and left, but stopped by his assistant's desk an hour later and asked her to order the book. He told himself it was purely out of curiosity. Amara, for her part, was not naive. She'd felt him watching. Not in a threatening way. She knew what threatening felt like, and this wasn't it. This was something quieter, something she refused to name, because naming it would mean deciding what to do with it. She'd made herself a promise before taking this job. Keep it professional, stay in your lane, save your money, go home. The plan was simple, clear, and did not include developing complicated feelings for a Korean crime boss who probably saw her as furniture. Except he had asked about her book. And the week before, she'd caught him standing in the kitchen doorway for a full minute, watching her hum to herself while she cooked. When she turned around, he'd simply said, "Smells good," and walked away like it was a completely normal thing for a man like him to do. She'd scrubbed the counter harder than necessary and told herself it meant nothing. It was the conversations that started breaking her resolve. They began small. He asked where she was from. Not generically, but specifically. Lagos. What part? And when she told him, he asked what it was like. She'd expected him to lose interest after 2 sentences. He didn't. He listened the way powerful people rarely do. Completely, without performing attention. She told him about the Harmattan winds, about Seoul's cold compared to Lagos heat, about her mother's cooking, and her youngest brother who wanted to be an engineer. She didn't know why she'd told him so much, until she heard herself mid-sentence and felt a small alarm go off somewhere in her chest. She wrapped up the story, straightened. "Sorry, you probably don't need all that. I asked," he said quietly. Like it was that simple. The alarm in her chest got louder. 3 weeks after the morning that broke his discipline open, Kang Se-won did something he couldn't explain to any of his lieutenants, his lawyer, or his assistant. He cleared his Sunday. He never cleared Sundays. Sunday was strategy, intelligence reports, financials, the week ahead. Sunday was never, under any circumstances, personal. But he cleared it, and found himself in the living room at 9 in the morning with no agenda. Amara walked past with a basket of laundry and stopped when she saw him sitting there, doing nothing. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said. She studied him for half a second. That sharp, reading look she always gave. "Have you eaten?" "Not yet." She set down the basket and went to the kitchen. He heard oil hit a pan, smelled onions, and something warm beginning to build. He got up without thinking and stood in the doorway. "You don't have to cook for me," he said. "It's your day off." "I know," she said. Again. Like she'd said it before. Like she did things because she chose to, not because she was asked. "Then why are you?" She paused, didn't turn around right away. Then, quietly, "Because you looked like someone who needed a proper meal. And I'm a person, not just a function." The kitchen went very still. He hadn't said she was a function. He hadn't said anything close to it. But somewhere in the way she said it, he understood she'd felt it. The invisible line he'd kept between them. The careful distance. The way he'd treated her courtesy like a service feature instead of a choice she made every day. "I know you're a person, Amara." She turned then, looked at him directly. "Do you?" It wasn't confrontational. It was a real question, asked without armor. It hit him somewhere undefended. "I'm learning," he said. Something shifted in her face. Not a smile, something softer than that. Something that scared him more than any rival ever had, because he didn't know how to protect himself from it. She turned back to the stove. "Sit down, Si-won-si." He sat, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Kang Se-won had breakfast with another human being. They talked about nothing important. Her favorite season, his dislike of cold weather despite living somewhere cold his whole life. The book he'd finished 2 nights before and hadn't mentioned yet. "You read it," she said. "I read it. And?" He looked at her across the table. "It was honest," he said. "Which is rarer than good." She laughed. Full, warm, completely unguarded. The first time he'd heard her laugh like that, it was the most dangerous sound he'd ever encountered, because every wall he'd spent 3 weeks reinforcing came down a little further. He was in serious trouble. Neither of them knew yet that someone had been watching. Someone inside Si-won's own organization had noticed the cleared Sunday, the breakfast, the boss coming home earlier than usual, and that person had already made a phone call. His name was Oh Min-jae, 43 years old. Senior lieutenant, 15 years inside the organization. He'd survived 2 leadership transitions, 1 gang war, and a public investigation that sent 5 men to prison. None of them him. He was loyal the way a knife is loyal, useful until it turns. Min-jae had been skimming for over a year. Not aggressively. He was too smart for that. Small amounts, carefully routed, the kind of bleed that only surfaces if someone is looking specifically for it. He'd been counting on Si-won being too elevated, too busy, to check the mid-level numbers closely. He'd been right, until the Busan trip. When Siwon came back asking quiet, specific questions, Min-jae felt the ground shift. He knew what those questions meant. He needed a distraction, something personal, something that would destabilize Siwon from the inside. The cleared Sunday gave him exactly that. He didn't move immediately. Men like Min-jae never did. He gathered more first, spoke carefully to a security guard who owed him a favor, a cleaning contractor who worked the lower floors. He built a picture: the Nigerian woman, the breakfast, the book, the early arrival's home. Then he made his call. Not to a rival, not yet. To Siwon's mother, Madame Han Soo-yeon. 71 years old, widow of the Baeko Group's founder, the single most formidable woman in Seoul's upper criminal class. She hadn't built the empire, but she'd held it together through its most fragile years by sheer will. Her opinion of her son's personal life was not a small thing. It was a weapon. Min-jae fed her just enough, respectful, framed as concern. Said he thought she should know. Madame Han said nothing on the call. But the next morning, she requested a lunch with her son. Siwon knew something was wrong the moment he walked in. His mother had chosen a private room. Already seated. Tea poured, hands folded. She smiled the kind of smile that meant she'd already decided how the conversation would end. He sat, kissed her cheek, waited. She poured his tea, asked about his health, asked about the Busan situation without naming it directly. She always spoke softly about hard things. Then she set down her cup. "I hear you've been spending more time at home." "I've been working from the penthouse more," he said. Not a lie. With the girl from Africa, the room's temperature didn't change, but something in Siwon went very quiet. "She is my household manager," he said. "She works in my home. We share the same space." "Siwon," his mother's voice softened. That was worse than if she'd raised it. "I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I'm telling you people are watching, and when people watch you, they watch everything around you. I'm aware of how this works, Iomioni." "Then you're aware," she said gently, "that there are things in this world that simply aren't possible, no matter how much we might want them to be. Our family carries weight. Our name carries expectations. The organization has allies who have daughters, who have been waiting patiently." He said nothing. "You are 37, she continued. "The longer you wait, the louder the questions get, and loud questions create instability. You know what instability costs us." He knew. He'd always known. He'd simply, for the first time in his life, stopped letting it govern every thought. "I'll handle my responsibilities," he said. "I know you will." She reached across, touched his hand briefly. "I just need you to remember what they are." He drove home in silence. Amara was reorganizing the study when he came back. She heard the elevator, heard the particular silence that followed his entries when something was wrong. She'd learned to read the weight of his arrivals the way a barometer reads pressure. She kept working, gave him space. He stood in the doorway. She felt it before she turned. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She turned. "Yes." "Are you happy here?" She blinked. Of everything she'd expected, it wasn't that. "Why are you asking me that?" "I want to know." She set down the books she was holding, looked at him properly. "I'm comfortable. The work is straightforward. The pay is fair. That's not really what you're asking, is it?" He stepped into the room, the first time he'd done that while she was working. He always stayed in doorways, one foot in the option to leave. "Not this time." "I had lunch with my mother today," he said. "Okay." She reminded me of things I already knew. Amara went quiet. She understood what was happening. She wasn't naive. She'd felt the walls of the world they were both living in. She knew what his name meant, what her position meant. She'd told herself 100 times that warm Sunday mornings and a man who listened like she mattered were not promises. They were just moments. "C1C," she said carefully. "You don't have to explain anything to me. Stop calling me that." The space between them felt charged in a way that had no professional language for it. She was too aware of how close he'd moved, too aware of the way he was looking at her, not like she was furniture, not like she was a function, but like she was the most important thing in the room, and he was still figuring out what to do with that. "Siwon," she said, testing it, barely above a whisper. Something moved across his face. Unguarded. Real. "I don't know what this is," he said honestly. But I know I'm tired of pretending it isn't something. She swallowed. Your world doesn't have space for something like this. I run my world, he said. Not entirely, she said softly. We both know that. He looked at her a long moment. She didn't look away. Neither did he. And in that silence, something was acknowledged between them that neither could take back. He picked her books back up. I'll finish in here and give you your space. She walked past him. He didn't stop her, but his hand caught hers, briefly, barely, the graze of his fingers against hers as she passed. She felt it like electricity down her spine. Neither of them spoke. Neither had to. What neither of them knew, in that charged study, was that Min-jae's plan had already moved to its second phase. And what came next would force both of them to stop pretending. Not gently, not slowly, but all at once. Min-jae moved on a Wednesday. He had photographs. Nothing scandalous. There was nothing scandalous to capture. But in the hands of the right people, context didn't matter. Suggestion was enough. A picture of Siwon's car in the garage on a Sunday. A picture of grocery deliveries that included Nigerian ingredients someone had specially ordered. Small things stitched into a narrative designed to humiliate. He sent them to 3 of the organization's oldest allies. Men who'd built their loyalty on tradition, bloodline, and the quiet understanding that Baeko leadership would always reflect a certain image. He included a note. Polite, concerned, devastatingly worded. By Thursday morning, Siwon had received 2 phone calls and an unannounced visit from an allied family head, who sat in his living room speaking in careful, insulting language about the importance of discretion. Siwon listened, thanked him for his concern, showed him out. Then he stood in his living room for a long time. He wasn't angry about the intrusion. He was angry because he understood exactly what it meant. Someone inside his circle had done this. Someone with access to details close enough to be dangerous. Someone who wanted him destabilized. He called his head of internal security. Find out who's been talking. Then he sat down and thought about Amara. She found out that evening. Not from him, but from the flicker of discomfort on the front desk manager's face when she came back from her afternoon off. From the security guard, who wouldn't quite meet her eyes. From the particular silence that greeted her stepping off the elevator, she walked into the penthouse. Siwon was in the living room. He looked up, and she knew immediately from the tightness around his eyes that something had happened. Tell me, she said. He did, plainly, without dressing it up. The photographs, the allies, the visit. He told her it was an internal problem, someone using her presence to build a narrative designed to weaken him. She stood very still through all of it. When he finished, she set her bag down slowly. So, I'm a liability. No, he said firmly. You are a person who's been used as a tool by someone who wants to damage me. That's different. Is it? Her voice was calm, but her eyes weren't. Because from where I'm standing, Siwon, the result is the same. I'm the problem people are calling about. The problem is a traitor inside your organization, and I'm the opening he used. She exhaled, looked past him toward the window, the river glittering below. I should probably start looking for another placement. No. The word came out faster than he intended. Harder. She turned back to look at him. He stood up. I'm not asking you to leave. You might not be, she said quietly. But your world is. I told you. I run my world. You said that before. Her eyes were steady on his. But today, 3 men called you about me. Your mother had lunch with you about me. Someone in your organization has been watching us closely enough to build a case. That's not a small thing, Siwon. That's the shape of the life you live. And I will not be the reason it cracks. He crossed the room. She didn't move back. She never moved back. That was the thing about her that had undone him from the beginning. She stood her ground in a way that wasn't aggressive. Just absolute. Like she'd decided exactly who she was, and no amount of pressure was going to shift it. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her chin slightly to hold his gaze. I found the traitor, he said quietly. It's Min-jae. My security team confirmed it an hour ago. He's been skimming for over a year, and he used you to create noise so I'd be looking in the wrong direction. Something moved through her expression. Is he going to be a problem? He's already handled. She searched his face. And the allies who called? I'll manage them. And your mother? He was quiet a moment. My mother wants what's best for the organization. But that conversation is mine to have. Amara looked at him. Really looked. The way she did when she was deciding something. He'd seen that look before, and had learned to hold very still when it appeared, because whatever came after it was always the truest thing she said. I'm not afraid of your world, she said finally. I want you to know that. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting from it. I know that, he said. But I need to know something. His voice dropped slightly. What am I to you? Not what am I in your house. Not what is this situation. What am I to you? The question sat between them like something alive. He'd spent 3 weeks building walls around the answer, burying it in Busan trips and intelligence reports. All of it. Every bit. Distance management, keeping himself from having to stand exactly where he was standing now and say what was true. He reached up slowly. His hand found her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with a gentleness that seemed almost foreign on a man built entirely from control. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed on his. You are, he said quietly, the first person in 20 years who made me want to clear a Sunday. Her breath caught. You are the reason I read a book in 2 days. His voice was low, certain. You are the reason I come home earlier than I need to. You are the reason I stood in an empty room for 4 minutes, like a man who'd forgotten his own name. He looked at her, completely open, all the walls down. You are the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me, and I have faced things that would make most men disappear. Her eyes were bright. She blinked once. Amara, I'm not asking you to understand my world overnight, he said. I'm not asking you for anything you aren't willing to give. I'm only asking you not to leave. Not because of them. Not because of noise I will silence. Stay because... He paused, something raw crossing his face. Stay because that Sunday morning was the first time in longer than I can remember that I felt like a person and not a position. The silence that followed was the most honest either of them had shared. Then Amara did something she hadn't planned. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest. Just that. Just the weight of her head against him, her hands loose at her sides. Not a performance. Not a statement. Just a woman putting down something heavy she'd been carrying alone. His arms came around her slowly, like he was learning how. They stood like that in the middle of his penthouse, the most powerful man in Seoul's criminal world, and the woman from Lagos who had refused to make herself small, while the city moved and breathed below them, entirely unaware. She didn't leave. She stayed. Not because she was asked, and not because she was afraid, because she chose to. And for Amara Chukwu, a woman who had built her entire life on deliberate choices, that meant everything. What came after was not simple. His world never became easy to navigate. His mother came for dinner 3 weeks later and sat across from Amara with assessing eyes, and said very little. But she came. The allies adjusted, the way people always adjust once they understand a decision has already been made by someone who cannot be moved. Min-jae disappeared from the organization quietly. Nobody asked questions. Nobody ever did. And Kang Si-won, a man who had spent 20 years mastering control, learned slowly, imperfectly, that the most powerful thing he'd ever done was let someone in. Not because she changed him, but because she saw him clearly, stood her ground completely, and chose him anyway. Some loves are soft and safe. This one was neither. But it was real. And in the world they both lived in, real was the rarest currency of all. Now, before you go, was Amara right to stay, knowing exactly what his world cost? Or was she giving up her freedom for a man who still had walls she hadn't seen yet? And Siwon, was that moment in the study, when he reached for her hand, the bravest thing he ever did, or the most dangerous? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me who you were rooting for from the very beginning, and when exactly you knew this wasn't going to end the way it started. Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you even a little, please like the video, share it with someone who loves a good love story, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode. See you in the next one.